Welcome to Come Let Us Reason Together. I am your host. Today we have a very, very special guest in honor of Black History Month. And we know that every day is Black History, but we want to hear Black history from a Kemetic, Pan-African perspective. And we have Brother Utin Ubuntu with us. Once again, Brother Utin Ubuntu. He will correct me if I mispronounce that, but it takes me a while to get it. So without further ado, I give you Brother Utin Ubuntu.
Peace and love, brother. Happy Black History Year. How are you this
Same
evening?
to you. I'm good, brother. I'm doing even better now, and I got you on the platform. Thanks for joining in with us and giving us your time.
Honored to serve, brother.
All right. So, brother, could you just, before we get started, tell us a little bit about your name? And
Okay.
right.
Well, my birth name was Winton Morgan. I'm from Bermuda, originally a small island in the Atlantic Ocean. I came up as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, from birth. And then maybe when I was about 21 years old, I'm 57 now, I woke up in church, worshiping a Caucasian Christ. And I asked myself, because there were 600 other Black people in that temple, I said, wow, is that really what Christ looked like? And the Spirit told me immediately, no. And I said, well, geez, who's the author of all lies? And the devil, came to me, and it really hit me hard because I was at a place where I wanted to know and live in the fullest truth. And unfortunately, fortunately, I had to get up and leave, because I realized that even though we were 250 to 400 years past the overt enslavement and oppression of our people, many of us were still spiritually slaves. And if we are spiritually enslaved, then there's no way our hands can do the work of love and liberation that must be done for our people. And, there's a great speaker, sister named Affiong El Affiong out of Nigeria, and she made a statement that was very powerful. He said, as long as you see God through the lenses of your enemy, you will never know freedom. As long as you see and know God only through the lens of your enemy, you will never know freedom in your lifetime. And I thought that that was powerful. And I realized that I was a spiritual slave to a false image that affected the self and group esteem of my people. And I got up and I went in my closet and I prayed and I asked the Lord to show me the whole truth. And just like David was, before Jesus, the Lord said to David, this day are ye my begotten son. And Jesus is descended from David. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so then that means that there is no such thing as the only begotten son. If the Bible prior to Jesus said, this day are ye my begotten son to David. And so we can start there. And you may have a couple of questions or statements off of my introduction, but the Son of God is a status of being anointed to your spiritual purpose. And when you are anointed to your spiritual purpose, you get a new name because your name, according to African spiritual traditions, your name should call you to your spiritual purpose in life. And you living your spiritual purpose is what makes you a Christ. Christ is not a person. Christ is a purpose that is ordained by the Most High, and every last one of us has that purpose. And so when I was reborn into that new purpose, I received a new name, and that new name is Utin. Utin means a humble offering to the Creator. That's all I think I can be, and most of us can be, is to offer ourselves to the one creator. And Ubuntu means he who puts his community before himself, which is an African principle that I also live by.
That's beautiful. I was having that conversation earlier today with a constituent of mine. Um, we were talking about the ecosystem and the laws of reaping and sowing and how we ought to be preservers of life and how everybody that exists and everything that exists has to give of itself so something else can continue to exist. And the moment we lose sight of that and become selfish is the moment that we destroy ourselves and everybody else around us. So I appreciate the name within itself, but when you talk about getting the image out of your head, one could surmise, according to School of Psychology, that the only way to get an image out of a person's head is to replace that image with something positive. And when I think about that, I think about the blemish or the mark, the scar that it has left on so many people to have the understanding or the way of thinking that the Messiah would be of the Eurocentric race. Say, how can I bow down? How can I worship an oppressor? You know, how can I look up to this? You know, and it kind of coincides with what you just said. Now, I'm standing on the side of no graven images at all. So I'm not choosing either side. However, I do understand. Um, one question I want to ask is, when it comes down to Kemet, what are some of the cultural traditions that the Kemetic people practice, or I guess the Sudanese people, or the whatever people that populated the land during that time? I know it was different groups of people from different places of the world. So what were some of the traditions that was used that would be considered primitive, you know, but it gave birth to what we consider modern today?
Okay. Well, baptism, the Ten Commandments, came from the 42 negative confessions to the Neter Ma'at. Circumcision is African. I mean, just those three alone. Without the Ten Commandments, there would be no no faith. Um, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, because Islam is largely an extension of Christianity, correct? So when we take the basic tenets of Judaism or Judeo-Christianity of living by divine law, being judged at death as being worthy or unworthy, and receiving paradise or heaven, or freedom from the ills of the world, all of these concepts are taken from literally one book of at least 10 that were written by our ancient Afro-Edenic ancestors prior to the Greeks or the Romans or even a Hebrew being able to read or write. Did you hear what I said? I said that when the Greeks came into Kemet, they were savage barbarians and they could not read or write. So they destroyed the library, which at that time was the world repository of information, until somebody said, hey, stop, you barbarian. you've destroyed 75% of the world's repository of information, and the 25% remainder became the Library of Alexandria that birthed the Western world into culture and civilization. And I say that in quotes because I think that the European world has yet to produce a civilization. The root of the word civilization is to be civil. And when you look at Roman history, you don't have a civilization. You have a bunch of warlords. When you look at European history and the 12 families that are tribes, the Vandals and Goths and all of those folk, those people were warlords. And, you know, even in Greece, you had a civilization that in its latter years copied the quote unquote gods, because there were no gods in Egypt or in Kemet. But when Hekapatah, which means house of Ptah, which became Egypt, when Kemet was conquered, it was renamed Egypt by its enemies. And so often people confuse the two. Kemet was the 4,197-mile cultural highway that ran 6,000 feet above sea level in Ethiopia, Lake Tana, that has it's a heart-shaped lake that produces 60% of the water that washes down to ancient Egypt, which is 57 feet above sea level. So the silt that washed off of that mountain, as well as the culture that washed off of that mountain in inner equatorial Africa, didn't just produce the land mass we know as Egypt today, as the Nile Delta. It produced the cultural crucible within which Kemet formed. And so, you know, it's extremely important that we understand that no Greek or Hebrew could write until they sat at the feet of African people who look like you and me at the great civilizations along the ancient river Nile. So literally everything from baptism to the 10 Commandments to living a life of abiding by divine law and being resurrected unto eternal life, all of those concepts, even the concept of man being formed on the potter's wheel, are all 100% African concepts that existed thousands of years before we had albino offspring now known as Europeans.
All right. So Egypt, Kemet, is known to be probably, like you just said, the #1 contributor to most civilizations, right? Now, if I was to break that down, how would I be able to determine exactly what that means? Because, like you say, the root word is to be civil, but how does that relate to culture? And this is a leading question because I need to know how a place that was so diverse in culture became so Islamic.
You said so Islamic?
Yes.
Well, the Arabs conquered Egypt in 1000 AD. And so, you know, just as many Africans in America today will say, well, I'm not an Egyptian, you know, why would this information be relevant to me? And they say that because just like Sister Harriet Tubman said, I freed thousands of slaves. I would have freed thousands more had they known they were slaves. See, when you're born in captivity, oftentimes you forget how to live in the wild. So, or live attuned with nature. See, culture means a proper culture. A culture means to nurture, to grow within a controlled environment. And so for proper spirituality to exist, we will live in tune with nature. And so some will say, oh, African people were primitive. They were not civilized because they lived out in earthen huts with trees over the top. But these people were able to live in tune with nature. They didn't have blood pressure, diabetes, and cancer, and because they lived with their feet on the ground. And so while I fully understand that, just like the African American, until he fully understands his history beyond civil rights and the civil rights movement, which is why I so appreciate you delving deeper than that in this conversation, we only know what we were born into, you see? And so that's the reason why history is so important. The Arab Islamic who lives in Egypt right now in 2023, his people have been there for over 1,000 years. So to him, it's laughable to say, well, this was an African, a black-skinned, sub-Saharan populated civilization, because he's had generations of people who have lived there along the Nile, and they taught him that he was related to Tutankhamen, that he was therefore related to Ursa Ma'at Ra Septep and Ra Ramesu Mary Amen, who we know as Ramses II. You see, so when you only know a thing and you were born into it, then that's all you know, and we can excuse that. But when we look at the Islamic culture, in example, and your question about how did Egypt become so Arab, in the Arab religion of Islam, not all Muslims believe this, but most Muslims believe that in order to go to paradise, you need to go to Hajj. And Brother Malcolm X, whose Muslim name was El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, he went to Hajj. And Hajj is a ceremony within which the Muslims seek at least one time to go, and they circle the Kaaba. Kaaba is Arabic for cube. It is a black cube that is draped with curtains, but the Muslims go and they're naked under a white cloth, and they try to circle the Kaaba 7 times and get close enough to kiss the northernmost corner of that Kaaba. And at that temple is a huge yoni. You know what a yoni is, brother?
No, I've never heard the term.
A yoni is like the lips of the feminine sexual organ. It's like a pair of lips. They call it a vesica piscis.
Vesica Pisces. Okay.
Yes, like the Christian pastor, some of them you will see a fish on the back, which represents to some the 5 fishes and loaves of bread, or Jesus the Christ who fished men to fish men in the Bible mythos. But the Vesica Pisces is like a fish turned sideways. It represents the womb of the woman. And on the northern corner of the Kaaba, and I could furnish some pictures of this for you that you could place up.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, but
yeah, it's like a circle with like a fish tail coming out.
Absolutely, but if you turn that on the side, right, and make this a little wider, in the middle is the black stone that the Muslims venerate at the Kaaba, and it is literally the head of Ishmael coming out of the womb of Hagar. And so the Vesica Pisces, that womb, that yoni is a Sanskrit word for a womb, but from that womb is the head of Ishmael, and Ishmael is the black stone. And so this is called in Islam Hagar Aswad, or Hagar the Black. Mm-hmm. It's directly into your question, because if Hagar was a black African wife given to Abram, who was also a black African, how did their child become a white Muslim or a light-skinned Muslim? You see? So the question reveals the power of holding the ability to tell your story over time, because many Muslims will argue with me about the African origin of the Kemetic culture and civilization until I point out Hagar the Black or the Hagar Aswad, where they literally go to kiss the womb of a black woman before they can get to paradise. And I know that this may sound controversial, but it is extremely important for us to know and understand history, because history is not just a bunch of dates and times. History tells you what you have done in the world and thereby what you can do in the world in the future. And that's the reason why many of our people are lost. They don't understand that they invented timekeeping, mathematics, science, writing on papyrus in 3 different languages before anyone else who did not look like them could read or write. And once we know that, then we will begin to produce the archetypes of the world again, like we once did in the past.
I'm glad you mentioned those things. Take me back. You mentioned Ramesses the second. Is that correct? I can't hear you, brother.
Yes, I did. You had a question about Ramses?
Yes. I wanted to make sure I had the right one. Okay, let's go back. If we go back to the era of Ramesses the second, right? What would you say the cultural language of that time was? You know, because if they speak in Arabic and some forms of Aramaic now, what was it then if it wasn't Hebrew or Greek or any of these other languages? What were they speaking?
Great question. And, you know, most people who are students know that paper came from papyrus and that the Africans, Egyptians invented paper, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And that they invented the world's first writing. They do not know that the first writing was called Medu Neter. Medu means writing of, Neter means divine force or God or creator. So Medu Neter was literally the first term that meant the writings of God, if we were to term that. However, God is a Germanic term that originates in Germany, and it further confines this concept of the one creator that has always been an African concept. At this point, I would like to share one fact with you. Although we've been miseducated, and if you allow your enemy to become your deity and to become your teacher, you will certainly be miseducated. But I would like to inform the listeners that there is no African spiritual system, not voodoo, not Yoruba, not Ifa, not any African spiritual system that has a devil. All of them, when they call on the name of God, Unkulu, they hold up one finger. There is no rival to God. This is a concept that was brought to African people by the colonizer. Um,
so the enemy created an enemy, is what you're saying.
The enemy created what?
An enemy.
The enemy took Set, which is one of the 36 attributes of the one creator that existed in Kemet, and they made him Set-on, or Satan. And they took Heru, the son of God, in that previous spiritual system, and they made him Jesus the Christ. And those are the only two polar opposites that we're aware of, is we're either on the good side or we're on the bad side. But that did not exist in ancient Kemet. There was no rival to the one creator. There was only creation and the divine attributes of creator. There was only the creator and its divine attributes. If God is supreme, then there can be no rival. If God is the greatest, then there cannot be a runner up there. You got to watch it. God is supreme, but watch out for his contender. No, you cannot have a contender and be supreme. But to answer your question specifically, the Medu Neter, which the conquerors called hieroglyphs, okay, or hieroglyphs. That was the first language, and realistically, uh, it's the only real language at that period in time, because the two children languages were both phonetic expressions of the original language. And so Middle Kingdom Egyptian was called Hieratic, and Late Kingdom Egyptian was called Demotic. And they were versions of or built upon the ancient Egyptian Medu Neter. And so, literally, Late Kingdom Egyptian is what became Greek, and Middle Kingdom Egyptian became Hebrew. And so, when you speak Hebrew, you're literally speaking an Egyptian dialect. When you speak Greek, you are speaking an Egyptian dialect. And this is the reason why this ties in again with your original question. What cultures produced what we practice today? The very language that we speak, Hebrew and Greek, are Egyptian dialects. And even how we measure time today is directly comes out of ancient Egypt, because the Great Pyramid ultimately was first and foremost a clock. So a lot of people are unaware, but the Great Pyramid um, doesn't have four sides. It actually has eight sides. The four sides have a convex in them that allows the Great Pyramid to cast no shadow at the equinoxes. And equinox means equal. Equa means equal. Nox means night. Okay, so equinox is the two times in the year that there is equal day and equal night. And so the pyramid was a clock that told time. And it told time by a 25,920 year cycle, of which the ancient Kemites saw three of those cycles. And they broke those cycles down into the 12 signs of the zodiac, which are just the zodiac is simply a pattern in the heavens that our ancients observed for countless thousands of years before they encoded it in a thing they called Zep Tepi. And Zep Tepi was when they built Horem Akhet, or what the Europeans call the Great Sphinx. They built Horem Akhet during the sign of Leo to mark the beginning of Zep Tepi. And Zep Tepi was the first time that they had recorded the 25,920 year cycle that it takes for the axis of the Earth to make a full rotation. And to put that in terms that maybe the children can understand, if you take a top and spin it on its point, it will spin perfectly upright, but at a certain point, it before it stops turning, it will begin to transcribe a backward circle on the table. Okay, and that's what the Earth does on its axis. The axis doesn't just sit up straight; it sits at a 26-degree angle. And so, just like that top would wobble as it began to slow its rotation down before it fell, the Earth wobbles. And so, the axis, if you were looking at it pointing to the upper right, it would take 25,000 years for that axis to move all the way around in a complete circle and get all the way back to that original point. And so the Africans did not just use the Great Pyramid to map out that 25,920 year cycle. They divided into 12 ages. And each of those ages is a period of 2,160 years. 2,160 times 12 is 25,960 years. And each age, because of the great year divided by 12 ages, we now have a lesser year divided by 12 months. You follow me? So everyone with the year divided by months. And what I'm saying is, if you tell time by 12 months, you are of 30 months each on, or 30 days each on average, you are telling time by an African timekeeping system that was laid out at the Great Pyramid. And as its smallest measurement are in ancient Kemet were herus. Daylight was measured by herus. The Son of God was called Heru. So they measured daylight by his name, Heruz. And when the Greeks conquered in 332 BC, they began to call daylight Horus. And today we tell time by hours. We still tell time by the name of the original Afro-Edenic Messiah Christ. We just don't know that we're doing it. Similarly, when we pray, whether we're Muslim or if we Muslim, we say Amin, Amin. If we're Hebrew or Christian, we say Amen. And Amen was one of the 36 divine faculties of the one creator, which was the hidden power in all things that gives it life. And so even today we pray to the Amen with our eyes closed because it represents the hidden power of the one creator in all things.
Now, wouldn't that hidden power be the vitamin D that comes from the sun?
Absolutely, that's part of it. And that was a funny a joke, but that is actually a beautiful analogy because many people say, well, I don't deal with that Egyptian stuff because those people worship the sun, or those people enslaved the Hebrews, or those people, those people. Brother, when you have your enemy become your deity,
Have mercy.
and allow them to teach you about the ancestors that they destroyed, you will never know the truth. And I don't mean you personally, I mean our people, and this, we never worshiped the sun. There were never any Hebrews enslaved in Egypt. These are myths that were copied from the books that were pre-written when the Greeks and Hebrews learned to read at the feet of our ancestors. When I was a young boy and was learning, they had See Spot Run and Dick and Jane. They had these books already written when I went into the classroom. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And so if I went into the classroom, there's no way I could come out of that classroom and say that I invented writing and that I should be a scholar and that you should allow me to teach you over and above the books that were written before me, you know. But we're dealing with a civilization that thinks that they could never even run the race, but they could claim the victory, you know. And so what I'm saying here is that, you know, we in our original writings, and we had many different books. um, our spiritual system was based on living in tune with nature. And so, the vitamin D produced by the sun is a beautiful analogy because, number one, uh, the only people God created were melanin sufficient dark skinned people. And I'm not teaching you racism. I'm teaching you that God made plants to absorb the energy of the sun. Is that right? So that
That's
they would
correct.
grow.
That's
Okay.
correct.
And that a human being is no different than a plant. Our blood is exactly like plant blood, except plant blood is focused around its central molecule is iron. Our central molecule is magnesium. And if you don't take magnesium, it doesn't matter how much of the other nutrition you take, it's magnesium that moves that nutrition into the cell wall. You see? And so, on this analogy of the sun, we never worshiped the sun, but we knew we lived in a solar system because we invented timekeeping. And we were here before anyone else was born from our loins. And so, the ideal diet for humanity is number one, sun activated breath. We should sit in the sunlight and breathe sun activated air deep to the diaphragm and then up into the chest because we are the children of the sun. I'm talking about the original people. The only people God chose were the people he chose to make first, and he made them blue-black so that they could live off of the energy of the sun. So the first way that we consume the sun is by sun activated light because the sun is 91% hydrogen, and our bodies are 50% hydrogen. The second way that we consume the sun is through melanin sufficient eyes and skin. Believe it or not, the temples at Kemet were replicas of the human body. The outer columns took the energy of whichever planet that temple was attuned to and brought it in to the outer columns. And the inner columns, I'm talking about the function of melanin, was literally built into the architecture so that the energetic frequency of the outer column was brought in to the intercolumnades, where it further honed that energetic light signature and moved it into ultimately into the holies of holies, and finally the most holy place, where the bark of the nectar would be illuminated with the corresponding divine energy. This is the prototype, again, still answering your original question about what cultural things contributed to Judeo-Christianity. The 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 temple was a replica of the human body, and the same way we should sunbathe and sun gaze. These are the second ways that we internalize sunlight, and that sunlight comes through our pineal blessed skin, goes in through our melanin, I'm sorry, or excuse me, our melanin in covered eyes and skin into the pineal gland, which is the actual seat of the soul in the human body. And so enlightenment is an actual thing in the process of attaining our spiritual anointment, you know.
Hold on, stop that. This is good. This is good. You going in. I just want to back up a little bit. You mentioned what was it? You said the body needs what element? What was that? Magnesium.
Human blood is built around magnesium. That's the core molecule of our blood, and the molecule of plant blood is exactly the same. It's just
Okay, so
of it. Yeah.
would that be correctly identified as magnesium phosphate?
I'm not sure, brother. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Not sure.
Okay. Okay. Because some argue certain points. That's all I'm trying to do is bring light to stuff. But then you mentioned the pyramids and how the structure of the pyramids is what gave birth to time and measuring time and things of this nature. Tell us how the sundial plays into this.
Okay, the pyramid is a sundial.
Okay.
The pyramid is a sundial. The Great Pyramid at Giza, it's a convex shape, and on each of the four sides it has a slight convex, so that at the equinox it casts no shadow. The pyramid completely swallows its shadow. And so here we have a 482 feet tall monument that is perfectly leveled on a 13-acre square base with some 2.5 million stones cut with the accuracy of 1/1000th of an inch, with cement in between the crack. And the stones are anywhere from 2 tons up to about 300 tons. And so, you know, this is an extremely amazing monument. It's a testament to time itself, because time is momentum measured. Time is momentum measured. And so, the Great Pyramid was built up into half of its size. They put a pole on each corner, and they transcribed a square in the middle. And there, our ancient prophet, priest, kings stood upright on the square, and they observed the vault of heaven against that flat plateau for thousands of years, until they were able to ascertain the speed of the rotation of the planet. Once they were able to attained that, they were also able, through the science of triangulation and other sciences we don't fully know today, able to determine the speed of the 7 closest planets, as well as the fact that they made the tones do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do as they rotated on their axes. And this is where the terms music of the spheres comes from. This is why they had temples that attuned the tones and frequency and spiritual qualities of the cosmos, you see. And this is a very important thing, because we often think that the Ark of the Covenant was a was something that was, there was only one that existed. But this story is an African story. The concept of these Ark of the Covenants, the arks were in every temple, and the temples and these stories originally were 100% African. You know, um,
You know, one thing I find very interesting about what you're saying is when I was in school, every music teacher taught how to play different notes on instruments based on do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But none of them told us about the etymology or the history of it.
most don't know the history of any of these things, you know, that are cultural linchpins. You know, most don't know why they say bless you when a person sneezes. Do you know why people say bless you when a person sneezes? Mo- Most people
You know,
have no.
this is what my grandmother taught me. It's because a person's heart skips a beat.
Mm. Well, I know that that's possible, because you can get at it sometimes if you're sneezing or coughing. But these things come out of European history, and just like that lion that was born in captivity that doesn't remember how to hunt in the wild, we can only, we can only repeat what we've been taught. But
Yes.
the bless you thing, here's where it actually comes from. Um, in 711 AD, a black
That's a
man,
good time. I'm glad you brought that up, but go ahead.
yeah, in 711 AD, a black man by the name of Jibral Tariq
Mhm.
took some 10,000 soldiers from North Africa, and he crossed the 14 miles, because from North Africa you can look and you can see Paris, France. He crossed over there, and the place where he landed is today named after him. It's called the Rock of Gibraltar. You heard that phrase before,
I
right?
definitely have.
And at one time, Allstate used to have a slogan, "Get a piece of the rock." Well, that rock was the Rock of Gibraltar, where that black man landed, and he conquered Spain and Portugal. And a lot of people don't know, but these Moors ruled Spain and Portugal from 711 all the way until the early 1400s, when they were thrown out. Um, and so, these Muslims brought in civilization to Europe. They civilized Europe. They brought in Europe's first schools, Europe's first 17 universities. They brought in algebra. That's a Muslim word. That they brought in mathematics. They brought in alcohol. That's a Muslim word. And at the time in Europe, it was illegal to bathe. They brought in verandas, which is another an Arabic word for a porch. You know, they taught the people, hey, you can't live in the barn with your animals. That's not normal. Okay, that's not civilization. They introduced this thing called a corral, and you need to put your animals over there. Okay, and bottom line is, the Moors did tremendous things in Europe. Now, don't get me wrong, they were conquerors, okay, and they came in via violence and conquest, but they moved Europe. Um, they were considered to be great because they conquered an army of some 100,000 people with 10,000 men, and they ruled Europe for about 800 years. Now, when they ran the Moors out of Europe in the mid 1300s or so thereafter, they
Did they run them out, or did they sell themselves?
um, what do you mean? Did the Moors sell themselves?
Yes. Did they do a treaty or something with them, some kind of covenant or agreement, or was it actual war?
Well, over a period of time, the Moors and others, and remember, Moor at this time just meant black, right?
Understood.
So there were Moorish Jews, all right, that were expelled by the Christians. There were Moorish Muslims that were expelled by the Christians, and I'm sure that there were treaties and those things, but the point that I'm getting at and that I want to stick with here, at least in this context, is what the bless you is about, because that's where we're going. Okay. I want to demonstrate how folk ways and mores of other people become, cultural things that we use and we don't even understand them. So when they ran the Moors out, when they ran out the scientists and their teachers and their scholars, who the Moors were, Europe fell into what they call the Black Plague. But it actually happened to white people. But white people tend to call anything bad black and anything good white. If you go to the store and look at the angel food cake, what color is it?
It's white.
It's white. And if you get the devil food cake, what color is it?
It's dark brown.
It's black. And I didn't make it that way. I'm just pointing out the reality, the sick psychosis of the dominant culture is labeling blackness wrong. And so everything black is evil and everything white is right. So they had a plague. And if you do the research, 33 to 50% of Europe died off after they ran the Moors out. They went right back. They went right back into savagery, and literally 33 to 50% of the population died off during the plague. And this is where the story, why people say bless you when you sneeze. Quick question. Wherever you live, brother, you're in Ohio, right?
Exactly.
Wherever you live in Ohio, if let's just take the best case scenario here. If 33% of the population died right now, you went outside, it was dead people out by their cars, dead people wherever they were, 33% of them died of something they didn't know what it was. Would there be enough medical personnel to handle that kind of emergency?
Probably not.
Not at all. Not at all, brother. You might have 3 hospitals and 400 times as many people. So I'm just trying to paint how horrid this scene was. 33 to 50% of the people are dead in the street of some disease. Don't nobody know what it is. Mama done died outside. You don't even want to go touch her. Okay? So here is where the nursery rhyme came from. Ring around the rosies. You would break out with a ring around your cheeks, brother. A pocket full of posies. Posies are a very aromatic flower. They carry a strong scent. So many people were dead in the street. They would carry a pocket full of posies just to cover their nose from the stench of the dead who could not even be addressed. They didn't want to get near those people. They didn't want to catch the plague. Pass you, we all fall down. See, we thought that was just a nursery rhyme. But the reality is, this is European history. And the disease was so bad, brother, that you could sneeze and die right there on the spot. And so that part of European history is why when somebody sneezes, you say, bless you right away. Because in this horrific story of what happened to those who had us in captivity and still have many of us mentally and spiritually in captivity, this is what happened to them. But we react to it as though it happened to us. but yeah, but yeah, it's we follow so many things that we follow because we were born under the domination of European civilization and culture. And while it's important that we respect everyone and that we are living in purpose to where we can bless anyone who needs a blessing in our circumference, it's important for us to be proper representatives of our own culture, of our own history, and we need to know our own stories. Most people do not know the Cinderella story is an African story. Most people don't even know that the Lion King is an African story, you know, and you know, it's just so many beautiful gifts that our culture has for us when we muster the courage to dig deep and find those jewels of history that can restore the self and group love that is essential to restore to our people so that our minds can begin to generate and our hands can do the brilliant things that we have done in the past.
All right. So, how would you say the world view would be as far as the diaspora over there? How do you think they get along with each other?
Who and where, brother?
I'm speaking about both sides of the Nile River. Do they accept each other as family? Do they look at each other as black, foreign? Um, do they share in the same traditions? How do you think it is over there as far as you know, community?
Um, on the continent, you have over 1,000 languages there. You have many different family groups, and what happened is that with the invasions, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that Kemet was ancient Egypt prior to 620 BC. In 620 BC is when you had the invading forces come in, and you had in 620, I forget who came in 620, but you had the Greeks come in 332 BC. You had the Romans come in about 600 years later, and then you had the Arabs about 400 years after that. The native people there largely are unfortunately still mostly colonized. Probably 80% of Africa now are Christians or Muslims, and for that reason, they are participants in spiritual practices that are at best fragments of their ancestral spiritual systems. Now, many of them still do practice along with Christianity or along with Islam some of their African um, cultural mannerisms, but or cultural expressions. But in general, our people are largely colonized, brother, and it's an unfortunate thing, but it is a beautiful thing that slowly our people are awakening. They're realizing that these religions, the fruits of these religions, are not right. The Bible says, "By their fruits shall ye know them." And a lot of people don't know, but the Muslims enslaved Africa for longer than the Christians did, and probably murdered millions. Some say as many as 14 million people were murdered and or made eunuchs by the Arabs. And then when the Pope, the head of the Christian religion at that time in 1440 AD, decreed by papal bull that all Africans must be reduced to servitude. Remember the year. Remember, I told you that the Moors ruled Spain and Portugal and the majority of Europe for almost 800 years. That's why you're Portuguese and your Spanish people and your Italians and your Sicilians are dark skinned people. You know, they weren't even accepted as Europeans until very recently, because the blonde-haired and blue-eyed European uh, sees them as the antithesis uh, to their own complexion. So our people are largely still colonized, but when the Pope, by papal bull, um, issued a decree that Africans be reduced to servitude. He said reduced because he knew at that point that Africans had elevated uh, Greek and Greco-Roman and European civilization during their period of rulership. And so now, after the Great Plague, where civilization literally fell apart, there was nothing there to get them through. What would you do? You would go and get them folks that taught you about alcohol and taught you about, gave you 17. You would go try and get them people back, wouldn't you? You know. And so here is a good place to introduce 2 points. Number one, they didn't go and get slaves in Africa. Now, some were slaves that were turned over by the Arab or the Muslim slave trade, and they were turned right over to the Christian slave trade. Okay, that did exist. But far and wide, what happened was many of the African founders of the Egyptian or the Kemetic culture, every time there was a wave of invaders to come in, right? The wave of invaders would come in and be like, oh my gosh, look at this. They got alabaster tile all along the River Nile. They've replicated heaven on earth. You know, this is amazing. So instead of destroying it, they would sit up and they would say, I am the Pharaoh. They would claim it, okay? But they did not possess the physical attributes nor the spiritual guidance to understand what they had inherited by force. But when they came in, the original dark-skinned African native ran back home to West Africa. Okay? Every time waves and waves would leave and go back home to West Africa. And many who are not steeped into the knowledge of ancient Kemet did not know that this was a matriarchal society. The pharaoh was the woman, not the man. But again, when your enemy teaches you your story, you are not going to get it, but the way he wants you to get it. When
Before you get into that, brother,
yes,
Ubuntu, because I'm gonna go there in a minute, dealing with the woman. I want to ask this question here, and this is a bit of a curveball, but I want the viewers to know, or at least have an idea of how Kemet becomes Egypt.
okay, all right. So let's put it this way, ancient Kemet was a university. And it was a university that, according to European scholarship, and please understand, Egyptology is a science invented by the Roman Catholics to hide what was being discovered in ancient Egypt. Mm-hmm. Okay? But according to them, this was the world's first university, and it lasted about 4,400 years. During this period of time, this school taught many different things. They had 42 different colleges in this one university, and in the college at Kemet, they literally replicated heaven on earth. Like, they literally, the Great Pyramids, the three Great Pyramids are replicas of Orion's belt. The Saqqara complex is replica of the Andromeda galaxy, and so forth. And so these temple complexes would channel the energies of certain cosmic forces at their height into these temples for the benefit of the temple dwellers. Well, when invaders came in, they didn't understand this huge system that took tens of thousands of years to develop. And so one of the earliest names for God was called Ptah. And the conquerors made Ptah St. Peter. They're still using the same language, Ptah, Peter. Please remember, in antiquity, there were no vowels. Okay, so PTR and PTR, right? Same
Mhm.
person. In ancient Kemetic, Ptah held the keys to the kingdom. Now in Christian iconography, St. Peter has the keys to the church. But the Roman conquerors conquered what the Greeks had, and the Greeks they were not racist, by the way. The Greeks tell you, Aristotle, Plato, Thales, Socrates, all of the Greek scholars went to school in Egypt.
Yes.
Socrates, Socrates
Yes.
was murdered for teaching spiritual teachings in Europe that the Europeans were not ready for. They killed him.
Yes.
Pythagoras, they call the Pythagorean triangle a Pythagorean triangle, but it's based on the Great Pyramid that he found already there when he went into Egypt. And so the earliest name for Egypt was Heka, He, house, Ka, spirit, Ptah, house of the spirit of Ptah. Heka Ptah became Egypt Ptah. Okay? So, similarly, Mesopotamia became Mesopotamia.